to raise the microphone since I'm so tall and heavy. Okay. Wow. Andres, thank you so much for that introduction. For a second, I thought MC Light was going to come out here and I was going to pass out and die. There will be a lot of hip-hop references in this speech, so I'll start with a quote from Mobb Deep to Andres. We done seen it all, we've been through it all, yo. To President Isanli Isbara, to the esteemed faculty, many of whom I call friends, to the SAIC staff and alums, to family and friends of this year's graduates, to my fellow honorees, Anne and Joan, to my own family, my dear husband and daughters and mom, welcome. It's my profound honor to stand before you, the graduates of the class of 2025. I stand before you, but I also stand for you and with you. In 1989, despite not being old enough, I somehow finagled my way as a student into the School of the Art Institute. I'm not exactly sure the calculus on how I was in the pre-freshman summer class as a rising ninth grader, a helper, but there I was, and here I am finally graduating. Look, Mama, I made it. Okay, now I drop my own children off at SAIC's middle school programs at the same doors that many of you traversed during your education. One of my daughters is herself going to be an 8th grade graduate this year, and thus the class of 2025. When I asked her what I might say, she said, go into animation. So shout out to all of the animation people. That apparently is the advice. But as you all set out on your next chapter of what promises to be an unpredictable and amazing journey, I, like so many others who were called upon this year to confer words of inspiration, have had many sleepless nights searching for just the right words, wondering what on earth I might say to your ears in this moment. What words wouldn't ring hollow and insufficient? What if there are no words? What if there's nothing that can be said? What if you're not allowed to say? What if you remain silent? You have the right to. What if that's not enough? What if I'm not doing enough? What if you are not doing enough? What if there's nothing that can be done? What if you do nothing? Why are we still doing nothing? What if we all did something, anything? What if you did everything you could, but it's not enough? What if you aren't sure doing anything is right? What if you always do the bare minimum? Who just barely graduated in here? What if you barely made it out? What if you have no business being here? What if there is an empty chair here for someone that should be here? What if you used to think it couldn't happen to you? What if you know that it's always happening to someone who looks like you? What if they forced us to go back? What if we are not going back? What if there is nowhere to go? What if you just stood by? What if you weren't an innocent bystander while they took the others away? What if you stood your ground? What if you stood for what you believe in? What if we sat in? What if you sat down? What if you kneeled? What if you prayed? What if we all prayed? What if we all cried? What if you never let them see you cry? What if you never let them see you sweat? What if they're trying to erase you? What if your art was to invent a reversible eraser? What if you just want to be invisible? What if you just want to be left alone? What if you want to just make art and not deal with all the rest of this other stuff? What if you just want to make money? If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. What if I told you it wasn't about the money? What if you told me, that's nice for you, MacArthur Genius Grant winner, but I have student loans to pay? What if I told you I got into the MFA program of this very school but couldn't go because I couldn't afford it? What if I told you I applied to business school and got rejected? That is true. What if it's not business as usual? What if you're standing on business like Diane? What if your parents really want you to be a doctor? What if artists are doctors? What if art is medicine? What if art and artistry are extremely contagious and the vaccine? What if there's no syndrome called imposter? You belong wherever and whenever you want to be, whoever you are. Yes. What if imposters, or beat biters as we used to call them, what if imposters are now in charge of the whole world? What if creativity led governments? What if artists led governments? What if leader was a full sentence and not empty titles we see occupying almost every sector and discipline across this entire world right now? What if it was, yes, what if it was the law for everyone to have happiness? It would be a crime to steal your joy. What if artists brilliantly ran powerful and transformative foundations? We see you, Angelique, at Skillman. We see you, Elizabeth, at Mellon. What if artists left the institutions and made their own worlds? What if we made our own schools? What if there are new art school modalities, Romy? These won't be televised. Turn the TV off, turn the TV off. My daughter said, do not say mustard, but I did. What if you gave up seeking validation after a reality show told you that your art isn't very good? What if your art isn't very good? What if you need to be practicing? We talking about practice? Yes, we are. What if you just make art however you feel? What if no one cares about your little feelings or your little friends? What if your art isn't for all the feels or the gram or for TikTok, but for future histories and for future truth tellers and seekers of beauty? What if you're a misfit? What if you are misunderstood? What if you are Missy Elliott? What if you just want your art to be understood? What if you just want everyone to understand one another? But what if suddenly your art changes the world? What if we hadn't painted those abandoned houses? What if after years of no one paying any attention, suddenly everyone wanted to hear everything you had to say? What if I listened to all the people who told me to follow the rules, to ask for permission? What if planting 100,000 red tulips evolved into housing policy? What if you are getting tired of my what ifs? So what if your own what ifs start right now? Now is when you make what ifs into what is. What is going to be your legacy, our legacy? It is the power of collective, sustained, creative effort. What is the world that you all want? What is it that only your artistry can do for this world? Practice your art like our lives depend on it, because they do. We need your joy and brilliance to permeate every corner of this globe. No matter how long it takes, carve a life beyond the traditional boundaries of your discipline, of your imagination. Go down in history, because you already are anyway. Yours will be the defining generation for the ages. Make sure you have showed up and showed out. I'm so glad that it is all of you who will be making the what ifs into the what is. And with that, I wish you all the success in the world. Congratulations, graduates of the class of 2025.